All right. It's now my pleasure to introduce our keynote. Casey Conway is the Director of Research and Corporate Engagement at the University of Alabama Center for Real Estate, housed within the University of Alabama Culverhouse College of Commerce, which is where I actually graduated from for my undergraduate degree. This is his, I think, third year in a row, which it is always exciting, it's enlightening, and most importantly, he can actually communicate with the real estate brokers because we're not that smart. So with that, I'd like to introduce KC.
All right, so we already have some fun and then lunch and get back out there into all that great Florida sunshine weather. So let's see where I'm at. So I'll start off here. So I thought I'd have fun with the topic. So in the topic, there's a quiz for admission next year to the event here, what OTIF means. So if you walk away with one metric, and I don't know if Karen was able to say this to the Fed, so this should be a new data metric for the Fed since they're so data dependent. OTIF, it stands for on time and in full. It's the most important logistics metric. Walmart's actually already deployed it. You'll have an OTIF rating and metric on every warehouse and probably retail center within 5 years. So I figured I'd start off with that. What the OTIF? It also gave me a good phrase for my kids when I come home from travel and I see, you know, the dog tore something up or the 9-year-old broke something. I had a reason when I came in the house to say, what the OTIF has been going on while I've been gone. So it's all good. So I thought I'd also use this as an opportunity to talk about what's the formula for the Florida-nomics 2020, because this is a very different economy than you've ever had before, and you should take a great deal of pride in it. So I've got a few graphics down there at the bottom. I've got a logistics transformer. That's a piece of artwork in a paper I published earlier this year. This is the time of year where we try to rethink what we're going to do next year, so I use the analogy vectors. Vectors determine our direction and our magnitude at which we do things. I've got a picture there. I went to Puerto Rico. Anybody from Puerto Rico here? I went to Puerto Rico in August. Puerto Rico is open. We need to support it. Business is back, and the mojitos are incredible. So this is a picture of red mojitos, and then this is a picture of a bull. This is actually the original Merrill Lynch bull that was on Wall Street in New York, and it has actually moved even to Florida. It found the salt taxes were too great in Florida. It's now in Isleworth Country Club in Orlando, and you notice he's even wearing red shoes like me. So even the bull agrees with everything I've said here. So we'll jump on with that. Most important thing I learned in my time at the Federal Reserve, 2005 to 10, a little interesting time, was you got to have a good disclaimer slide. So these are all my opinions. So Jeremy, I'm protecting NAI, and everybody here and the sponsors, these are my opinions. But I will share with you that NAI and Jeremy and I and all, we do pontificate about the economy and what the OTIF influences is going on down here. So we do that once in a while. Here's my bio and all. You can see my pictures. I wear the red shoes. On the right there, those are my casual red shoes. Those are my red Allbirds. I wore my formal ones for you guys today. I really dressed up Miami style here. And then, of course, the bull now is even wearing red shoes here in Florida. This is where you can find any of my material or papers I talk about. Here's our website at the top. And then there's a blue arrow going down there to, I produce a weekly Wednesday Insight. I have a lot of fun with this. It was something I always dreamed about being able to do at the Federal Reserve or in the banking industry and could never do. I go completely off script. I give you my real impressions. I even keep a running list of things I thought I would never hear in my career. Things like Bitcoin is a safe haven. That was recently talked about this summer. My most recent one, it was announced, I grew up in Colorado, that Coors is leaving its headquarters in Colorado and moving to Illinois. What the OTIF? You're leaving a really great atmosphere with cannabis, and you can do it legally and recreationally, and you're going to one of the most fiscally wrecked states in the country where you don't even know what your taxes are going to be? Really, what the OTIF? So you can read all of that there. So what's behind this economy? What's really going on? So Karen was right on this when she spoke a little bit. A lot of what's driving all of us in the previous panels is disruption. And so I'm 57, I'm an old baby boomer, and most of us thought it took a long time for technology to embed it. Remember how long it took to get a rotary phone to a dial tone, so it didn't take 10 minutes to dial somebody? It took us about 50 years to get comfortable with air travel, and now we have to just deal with bad peanuts and taking our shoes off at the airport. It took us over 20 years to get comfortable with an ATM machine, and to believe that if we actually put the card in there, it would come back with money. And our cell phones, our smartphones, it took us a dozen years to become totally addicted to these things. This is why we need legal cannabis and hemp, just to get us off the pain addiction of our smartphones. But what's happening with technology today, it's happening more and more quickly, and it's disrupting the economy in ways we can't even begin to imagine. So this curve here we put together, I did with my friends Trepp in New York for a conference earlier this year. The upper part of the curve with the blue dots, that's what we've already been through. Most of you have heard of the internet, the cloud. Okay, come on. We've all heard of that. The green is kind of what we're going through right now. What do you do with robotics and drones and what they're all going to be? The orange here is kind of what's ahead of us right now. Things like smart cities, autonomous trucking, and then we have all this to go. And these things are happening really quickly. And I'm going to compliment Florida on how quickly something is happening that puts you in the forefront of the country. Driverless autonomous trucking. This year you became the first state to pass legislation to fully enable 100% autonomous trucking starting January 1 next year. You've passed the legislation dealing with liability insurance, the technology, and the vendors. And starting in January, someone deploying an autonomous truck in Florida will hand it off to essentially like an air traffic controller. And these controllers will be set up in rooms creating new jobs that will pilot and oversee like an air traffic controller the landing and travel of that truck from its point of departure to its point of destination. And next year, you'll be the first state where autonomous trucking can cover the whole state on every state, federal, and U.S. highway. No other states there. Texas is close. And so what that means for you is incredible opportunities in logistics and a whole other area of jobs and technology that you've got there. And that means the importance. How many of you, anybody of you from Lakeland or Central Florida? Okay, you heard me talk last year. It's the new inland empire of California. And all these autonomous trucks are going to be ending up on I-4 and in Lakeland. And the nice thing about these autonomous trucks, they're going to run at night when we're asleep. They're going to run when it's during the rain and we're off the road, so it doesn't congest our roads anymore. They're going to be off the bridges at our ports. They're going to be moving elsewhere and autonomously. They're not going to have as many accidents. And what's happening is the synergies between Lakeland in Central Florida and the ports down here is incredible. Home Depot just concluded a deal in Plant City near Lakeland, in between Tampa there, to basically bring all of its materials and goods that it's getting into its stores into Port Everglades and have them all delivered by autonomous trucking next year into Plant City. That would not have happened without the synergies of this type of legislation. So you guys are the first to do it, and it means a lot of things. The second thing, I always like to give some special secret sauce. So one of my special secret sauce things is, where do you find out what's happening in this disruption? And how does it play out for us? So I would encourage you to look at things like the global citizen reports by major companies like FedEx. Most of the companies that deal with ESG, environmental and social governance today, produce these type reports. And they tell you more in those reports than they will ever tell the SEC or the Fed in a Fed survey. And they'll tell you everything. And this one in FedEx I did, this is a recent report for 2019. And on page 19, they tell you what's going on with trucking and what they're doing to reduce the number of truck miles and take over 1.3 billion miles of truck traffic off the road in the next few years. Double trailers, bigger trucks, autonomous trucking, trucks moving with compressed natural gas on the top of the trailers instead of diesel fuel, so that we're dealing with green initiatives. They're telling you things in here that you will never find anywhere else. So I really encourage you to look at the global citizen reports of major companies like FedEx. They'll tell you a lot what's going on. All right. So here's the second big message I want you to take away. Know what you don't know. And see, I thought that was my middle name when I was a kid growing up. Didn't you know that? All 12 years of parochial education with nuns, I'm still scarred. Didn't you know that? Didn't you know that? No, sister, I didn't know that. So I have a picture here, and this is really the great margaritas from Puerto Rico, or mojitos from Puerto Rico. And so we're in this debate today with our media. Are we going into recession? Are we still in recovery? Is the glass half full? Is the glass half empty? And my response is, who cares? I can give you a set of statistics that show the glass is half full. Consumer confidence, small business optimism, REIT returns, corporate earnings. We've just finished almost corporate earnings for the third quarter, and they're incredible. I can go to the other side, and I can give you a whole list of statistics that show, oh my gosh, the sky is falling. Karen spoke earlier there, Fed and the Fed monetary policy. Look at what the Fed put us through at the fourth quarter last year with rate hikes last year, and not even pay attention to what Karen showed us, which was the Fed's basic problem on interest rates was that they got bored. They fulfilled their two mandates. They fulfilled mandate number one, which was full employment. We're there, 3.5% unemployment. They fulfilled mandate number two, which was price stability. Anybody seen inflation anywhere? It's nowhere, it's gone. Right? And so they got bored and they said, what should we do now? And they looked around the globe and they said, we have a monetary policy problem. We've exported quantitative easing to the rest of the world and they've gone crazy with it. We got up to $17 trillion of negative yielding bonds this summer in Europe and in Asia. And so basically, can you imagine this in a real estate deal? Selling somebody, Jeremy, a piece of property and saying, I guarantee you it's going to be worse, or it's going to be worth less when you get it back? That's what we're saying on bonds. I'll give you my money and you pay me back less. To the tune of right now, $14 trillion of that around the world. So like all good things, the Fed realized in America, we invent things and we love to export them. And not all of them are good. So we invented Coca-Cola, right? This is the Atlanta Fed Bank, so we'll pick on Coca-Cola. We invented Coca-Cola and we exported to the rest of the world, and what did we give them? Diabetes, right? Then we went and we invented fast food, and we invented it in Yum brand restaurants to China and the rest of the world, and what did we give the rest of the world? Cardiac disease. Then we created monetary easing and QE during the financial crisis and exported to the rest of the world, and now what do? Negative yielding bonds. So the Fed said, if we're paying 1.5% to 2% on treasury bonds and the rest of the world isn't even giving you back your money, what do you think happens to capital? It comes here. It comes here not just in bonds, but in real estate, in stock prices, in every US denominated asset. And so the Fed says, oh my gosh, we're creating asset bubbles by having these interest rates too high. So they're basically trying to control quantitative easing by getting us back to zero. And if you think the Fed's done and on pause, you're crazy. I'll give you some great oceanfront land in Las Vegas and Arizona and whatnot. The Fed is probably going to take this down even lower, because we still have this monetary imbalance. And look what's happening to our stock market. Look what's happening to our real estate prices. This will be a record year for foreign capital flows into the United States. And it's all because of the imbalance. We're the only place with growth. We're the only place that pays a dividend on interest rates and yields. It's the only place you can get a corporate dividend of 4%, 5%. Look at the REITs. And so unless the Fed pinpricks that, that's going to continue and create asset bubble prices. That's really what's going on with that squiggly Legoland type chart that she had there. And so I think the Fed has an ED problem. It's not erectile dysfunction, and it's not something that a purple pill election will solve. It's economics dysfunction. The Fed tells us they're dependent on economic data, but they'll never tell us what data. And largely it's bad government data. It's made up government data, like the jobs data. It's the stuff is made up. I'll show you in a minute. And so until we get the Fed to look at really good private industry data and the new modern data and redo algorithms on things like job data, I'll give you one good example. So when we get the government and the US Census Bureau jobs data, it tells us what about retail? All the jobs are going away. No, they're not. They're in this sector called logistics. Where's logistics in the government coding in the NAICS system? It's in the transportation sector. I mean, the stuff that we've got and the algorithms and all the time that the Fed has and all these economists, they need to go redo all of these economic models and these things that feed us data. Just give up this Lenten season. So I'm a good scarred Catholic. Give up bad government data and make it habit forming and rely on only private data. So here's my picture influences I got up at the top. These are the things that are really going to determine our outcome. So Karen mentioned, tariffs and whatnot. They're not a problem for us, right? And high salt levels in your ocean levels down here, they're not a problem for you. You guys are getting the right kind of salt. All that from New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, you're just sucking it down here right and left. The other thing I want you to pay attention to is the elections. Karen was right. They're not just a little disruptive. This next year could be incredibly disruptive. And one state to pay attention to is Georgia. See, most states aren't supposed to elect their senators every year or each at the same time. We're supposed to just elect a third of the Senate every cycle, so you only have one up for re-election. Well, Georgia has both its Senate seats up because Johnny Isakson is ill and is stepping down. So both our Senate seats are up, and Georgia has turned into a purple state. And if Georgia turns both its Senate seats from Republican to Democrat, Congress is going to wish it had waited a little longer on the articles of impeachment for Trump, because if they would have waited until the Senate turned, they probably could have then impeached him next year. But he still won't leave the White House. Don't worry. He's staying. He's not going anywhere. So I'll leave you with one last thought. Kieran mentioned Brexit and how drawn out it is in Europe and what a problem is. We need to pay attention to it. I fear we're on a political path that we're going to have our own Brexit in 2021. And there's already a term for it. I've already given a term for it. It's called Flexit. It's where Florida and Texas say we've vacuumed everything we need. All the wealth, all the banking, all the jobs, all the technology, and Florida and Texas are going to say, see y'all later. You think I joke? I was just in Texas and gave that speech, and they were cheering, right? They were giving me new cowboy boots and buckle belts, and they're making them up in Austin, Texas, called Flexit and beyond. So pay attention to this stuff that's going on. All right. The other thing is, most economists don't realize that they're really headed for weather forecasting. So I've been brushing up on my weather forecasting skills, because most economists, we just make up the numbers and then we get paid to revise them until we're right. And that's what the weathermen do, right? But it's important in weather forecasting to know the difference between innocuous clouds and really serious storm clouds. You guys know what a cumulus cloud looks like coming across from an African weather wave. And so what I want you to think about is all this economic data that we get. Think about which data is just innocuous and noise, and which is very serious cumulus stuff we should pay attention to. So on the left column over here, this is the National Bureau of Economic Research. And again, Fed relies on a lot of this, bless their heart. They look at primarily 4 data points: employment, industrial production, physical retail sales, and personal income. And with those 4 data points, they determine when we have a recession and a recovery. Now, guess when they tell you that we've entered a recession or a recovery? 2 years afterward. You really want to pay attention to that data? Let me suggest an alternate group of data. And when the Fed says that they're data dependent, the one question I wish one reporter would ask the chairman is, what data? Could you give me 5 or 4 or 3 data points that you really pay attention to? Well, here's the Red Shoe Economist's modern 8 metrics. So on the employment side, I look at no government data, because as you know from prior talks, I look at government data and the Bureau of Labor Statistics data. Here's my one formula I give you. BLS minus L, labor, equals BS. They make this stuff up, right? It's barbecue sauce. So I've learned, I grew up in Colorado, I've learned after 35 years in the South, you have to have polite ways of saying things. The polite way to say BS in the South is barbecue sauce. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics jobs numbers are based on a household survey of 1,000 people at home in the afternoon with a landline. Who in the hell are they talking to? I guarantee you they've never talked to any of you. I've been doing this for over 30 years, and I've never met anybody that's been called by the BLS and asked their opinion on labor optimism. And I speak to 70 to 80 audiences on an average of 300 to 500 a year, and I've never met one. Not one. So I look at things like ADP, they're the largest payroll processor. I look at Paychecks, which looks at all the small business. And I looked at LinkedIn. How many of you have a LinkedIn account? 190 million of us do. This is good data, Fed. This is better than the beige book in your anecdotal surveys. 190 million people have a LinkedIn account. LinkedIn has a new workforce report. And if you're worried about what Facebook knows about you, oh my God, you ought to be scared to death about LinkedIn. Jeremy, they know when your people are going to change their jobs before they do. They monitor, have algorithms that follow all of our traffic and our posts, and they know when we're disgruntled and who we're posting to and who we're likely to go to work for. They divide all of us up into 50,000 industry segments, from plumbers to doctors, right? And what they do is they create what's called a skills gaps analysis for every city. And they tell us by industry what skills and what labor each city needs and who has it. So for example, here in Miami, right, you need engineers and IT and medical people. Guess where the supply of them is? It's in places like Tuscaloosa, Alabama. We mint about 8,000 of them a year, and there aren't 8,000 jobs in Tuscaloosa. It's only 100,000 people. It's about the size of the Virgin Islands. So there's where you go export them, and here's where they come. So if you want to look at economic forecasting and supply and demand on real estate, look at this stuff. I also look at things like the NFIB Small Business Report. 2/3 of our economy runs because of small business, not large corporations. And they're very optimistic, and they're expanding really rapidly. I look at corporate earnings. We just finished third quarter corporate earnings. Any of you have a general gauge on how many of you think they were okay? They weren't okay. They were great, right? And this is the 4th consecutive quarter with tariffs in place when we've been told every quarter we're going to hell in a handbasket because of the tariffs. And guess what happened? Kieran was exactly right. Companies have figured out how to rework supply chain and increase efficiencies to deal with the tariff costs. And I'll give you an example. Walmart reported earnings yesterday. 41% increase in online sales. 21st consecutive quarter of beating earnings expectations. Same store sale comps of over 3%. This will get you. How many people a week do you think shop at Walmart either online or in a store? Almost the entire U.S. population. 275 million people make a purchase at Walmart every week. And 90% of us live within 10 miles of a Walmart. Look at other retailers and what they're doing. Look at companies in Florida like CSX Rail. CSX Rail said, hey, we had lower revenues, but guess what we had? We had more profits and earnings because we've become more efficient as a railroad and we're moving more containers rather than bulk cargo stuff. It's really important to look at the earnings, and I would encourage all of you in your MSAs and in your state to look at the quarterly earnings of the major corporations that influence your economy. So I'm very optimistic. The only metric of my 8 that are negative is rail traffic. Now, normally, rail traffic is one of my favorite that always predicts a recession or recovery, but this time it's not. You know why? Guess what comprises half of what moves on rail? Petroleum and coal. We're now putting petroleum in pipelines, and we're not using coal. So half of that rail traffic is gone. We freed up the capacity to do containers and more logistics. And so that part is very positive. And who cares about the coal, right? And the petroleum's in the pipelines, it's safer. So I don't think rail is going to be the predictive indicator this time around. So here's a chart, the slide that shows you on the left, that's the NFIB Optimism Index. And you can see from the month after Trump was elected until current, it's gone into record territory and it's set over a dozen records. On the right, one of the ones I track is lending activity and real estate loan performance. TREP is the largest entity that tracks this on permanent loan debt, and we're setting new record lows for delinquency and non-performance ratios in permanent debt markets. We're now down to 2.5% from an 8 to 9% ratio at the peak of the market. And then there's the railroad showing that we're 7 consecutive months of negative numbers, but it's because of petroleum and coal. All right, here's a map of the U.S. If we do have a recession, recessions don't play out equally across the country. So let's look at how one might play out. If you start up in the Great Lakes move a lot of commodities from Canada and down into our industrial area. So if we have a commodity thing which the tariffs could affect, that's where that region gets affected. Guess what else this region got affected by recently? The GM auto strike. All 55 North American plants for an entire month, 46,000 workers in this part of the country were all shut down. Let's say we have another financial crisis. The green arrows over on the right. I've got them pointing to North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. Right? Why do I have them pointing there? These are your financial centers. Wall Street's toast. The banking's moving to Brickell Avenue. All the REITs, all the permanent investment banking, it's all right there on Brickell Avenue. There's not going to be any left. Look at the major bank mergers that are in place right now. SunTrust and BB&T, where's the headquarters going to be? The bank that underwrote Coca-Cola and was the household bank in Georgia is saying, see ya, and they're going to North Carolina. The banking center in the Southeast will permanently be in Charlotte, North Carolina. Look at the other one that affects you a bit here, Iberia and First Horizon. Its headquarters is going to be in Memphis, Tennessee. So if you're looking at banking and where consolidation affects, those are regions that impact it. If we're worried about manufacturing or a freight recession, look at the bottom down there in the Gulf. Look at Alabama, Arkansas, Louisiana, Tennessee, South Carolina. This is where we manufacture a lot of cars. Mercedes, BMW, Toyota, Honda, Kia, Hyundai, you name it, right? We make it, and we also do aircraft. We do Boeing in South Carolina and Airbus in Alabama. So a manufacturing slowdown, this is where it's going to be felt there. Not so much in Florida. And then you have the red box there. That is basically energy and the shale and the fracking, and it's also where all the jobs are leaving the West Coast. So it's a big sucking machine. Salt Lake City is sitting there like you guys are, Utah, and they're sucking everything out of California. Arizona, Texas, and Utah are just sucking everything out. In Utah, I just spoke in Salt Lake City. In Salt Lake City, 100 companies leave California each week and relocate to Salt Lake City. I mean, it's as big a deal as what's happening with Wall Street in the Northeast moving down here. So keep in mind how things play out. This is a good piece. How many of you read this? It came out early in the year by University of Central Florida. Anybody here from University of Central Florida? Kudos to the university. Great stuff. In terms of economics, this is where the Federal Reserve branch bank should be in Florida, at the University of Central Florida. You guys know the economy here and do better reporting and research on it than anybody. A couple things I'd like to point out there. Their numbers showing Florida's GDP, right now you're a little over $1 trillion, and they show it going to over $3 trillion over the next 10 or 15 years. What the OTIF, right? That's what's going on. Look at the other blue arrow going down to financial services jobs. These fill up a lot of office buildings. Look at the growth trajectory of what's forecast here. This is everything leaving the Northeast. This is the banking industry loving Florida, and the population, and the trade, and the business. So this is a great report. If you really want to know the Florida economy, get this report from the University of Central Florida. Here's the other one, translate everything local. This is the jobs data, and I looked at beyond a quarter-over-quarter or year-over-year period. I looked at the last 5 years. And so if you look at who's produced the most jobs over the last 5 years, in what you'll see is Utah is a percentage, but it's a small state. Salt Lake's only 2 million people. But look at Florida, number 4, over 15% job growth. What the OTIF, right? Look at Texas in there. Right? It's a big state, over 11, 12%. When you have a big state like Florida and Texas producing job growth in the double-digit numbers, this is something systemically changed in the economy. And Florida isn't housing and tourism anymore. It's much more diverse and much more important than that. So look at those numbers. And the reasons are it's affordability, it's low tax, it's quality of life, it's sunshine. So the sea level rises a little bit. Everybody's going to buy a jet ski or a houseboat and we'll just putter along the streets. It really is no big deal. And when New York talks about Miami being underwater, I would say, heck yes, we are. We're a hell of a lot more liquid than New York. We have all the banking assets. We're incredibly liquid here in Miami. All right. Florida, this is an article on all of the migration out of the northern states here. You're the #1 beneficiary of the 2017 Tax Act and the impact of people and businesses relocating from high state and local tax states. And it's a real problem. And this is why I think we're going to have Flexit. Florida and Texas, when New York comes and says, hey, you took all our people, could we start taxing Florida to pay for our infrastructure? I think that's when we have Flexit, right? You in Texas say, no, get out of here. We're done. So this is incredible. This is one I found. A good friend of mine, Todd Jones up in Tampa, always feeds me good stuff like this. This was a piece that he sent me on 13 mind-blowing facts about Florida's economy. Number 1, if you were your own country, you'd have the 17th largest GDP in the world. That's incredible. Right behind California, even bigger than Texas. Florida's top export. How many of you know what your #1 export is? It's civilian aircraft. You guys make more of what Boeing and Airbus don't for commercial industry. You make the civilian aircraft industry, and you train the pilots. These are high-skilled, high-manufacturing, high-wage jobs. The Everglades. Jeremy mentioned, the importance of your tourism and serving your environmental resources. The Everglades generate over $100 million in tourism benefits for the economy. How many of you know what Florida's #1 export is? Right? Anita Bryant would just be shocked that she'd have to sing a meat song instead of an orange juice song. It's meat and cattle. And the other thing I always heard over my whole career, Florida's about out of land. There's no more left in South Florida. The Everglades have all taken it over. You can't redevelop. 2/3 of Florida's land is still farming. There's a hell of a lot of land. There's a lot of room for growth. Don't let New York and them tell you that there isn't a place to go, or if we need to relocate Miami, there's a lot of land we can move it to. It's going to be just fine. All right. I'm going to go through a few on the property type outlook on each property. In the upper left corner there, these are a few takeaways I would say about the economy. Number 1 is we have too much fixation on where are we in the cycle. Who cares that we're 124 months into recovery? Recoveries and recessions don't have expiration dates. They're driven by systemically different things. And what we're seeing an economy today, nationally and in the state of Florida, in the Southeast, perform like what we expect in the first part of an early recovery, not 10+ years in. We're finally getting things right that weren't done in the first 5 to 7 years of this recovery. Deregulation, taxes, all the things that businesses need to grow. And you guys are at the center of it. Low tax, low cost of living, affordability, great workforce, you have all those things. The second thing is We remain the preferred location of foreign capital. And that's not changing. And when you travel around the world and you say, name me 3 states in the United States, Florida is in those 1, 2, or 3. If I went to China, I couldn't tell you 3 of the top provinces, right? But the rest of the world can tell you that Florida is one of the top 3 name recognition places, and it's where they want to put money to work. Whether it's to buy a house, a second home, a condo, put a business, you name it, it's one of those. The third thing is the market loves industrial. So how many of you do in property types that are other than industrial, like apartments or retail or office? Okay, no you don't anymore. It's all logistics. You're going to rename everything logistics, because logistics is what's in. It's what lenders love. It's what equity loves. And really, it's about warehousing. If it's an apartment, we're warehousing people. If it's retail, we're warehousing goods. If it's office, we're warehousing workers. Everything's logistics. You'll get a lower cap rate, a higher LTV, and better financing treatment. So everybody, you do logistics. No more other property types. Just one property type. The rate you economists, one property type. The other thing is those of you that do office. Who raised your hands in office? All right, here's what I want you to pay attention to. We heard about what happened to WeWork, right? We just had the wrong first experiment. The co-working model is not dead. It's going to continue for a long time. It's because companies are trying to become more efficient. Ask Kiernan about what's happening in the financial services industry. The banks are trying to get their efficiency ratios down. That means getting rid of people, it means getting rid of branch banks, it means automating, it means less office space or more efficient use of office space. And so the thing that companies are paying attention to is the cost per employee, not price per square foot. So if you're pitching a major company on an office deal and all you've talked about is the rent per square foot, you just lost half of that discussion. But when you can talk to them about how many employees, what are they doing, how many are in cubicles, how many are in open space, and you can talk to them about this offering from the landlord equates to this cost per employee, now you've just distinguished yourself from every office broker and you just won the deal. It's cost per person, not cost per square foot. There's some big issues that are coming at us that we've got to pray do not come to us from New York or California or Seattle or any of these crazy places. It's things like rent control, and it's things like just insanity and property tax type stuff. We're going to see some major Supreme Court cases that I'll talk about here. So let me go into each of the property types real quick. Housing. Do you guys have down here yet any new home subdivisions where all the homes are for rent, not for sale? That's the new trend. This is housing affordability. The millennials want the flexibility of being able to move. They have student loan debt. They can't qualify for a mortgage, but many of them are starting to get married and have kids, and they need a house. They need a garage to store stuff, right? Like the baby stroller and the jet ski and all the golf clubs and all that stuff. And they want a home. And a way you avoid multifamily zoning issues in school districts is to say it's a single-family home subdivision. This is how home builders are building multifamily in single-family zoned areas. This is how a millennial gets essentially a bigger apartment in a great school district that looks like a house but actually rents like an apartment. And so this is one. American for Homes is a big one here. It's absolutely incredible. We're getting rents below $3 a square foot in this product. So when you look out here and you see your rent's well above $3 a square foot, you can do these homes. And when you look at your bright line, and I think you're going to see a lot of these type developments develop around there. Inclusionary zoning. Okay, this is where the local governments come in and they basically steal from you. They basically say, if you want to rezone this land, that's fine, but you got to give us so many affordable housing units. Well, there's a case going to the Supreme Court in Northern California, Marin County, north of San Francisco, that'll be heard in the first quarter. And I think that inclusionary zoning is going to be stricken down as unconstitutional. It is eminent domain without compensation. And we're going to see that any of the local jurisdictions that want to do inclusionary zoning, it's going to be like a condemnation, and they're going to have to pay you. This is a huge item that's finally going to come. So any of you that do land development or multifamily developers, follow this case a lot. The other one is multifamily. The new concession is furnished units. So you've succeeded in getting millennials to pay you $4 a square foot in rent. They just can't afford to furnish it. So they're going to ask you as a concession to furnish the apartment. And a lot of our multifamily guys are going to say, that's okay, we'll do it. We'll sign for 6 months or 1 year on your rental furniture. What happens after 6 months or 12 months? Go call Karen and ask her what the CFPB, Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, is going to do. They're going to stick you as a developer with that rental contract. This is going to be the biggest mess as a concession to multifamily that we experience the next 2 years. Do not go down the rabbit hole of providing furnished units or commingling the contract for the rents between the tenant and them. So that's my spiel on housing. Here's retail. I just published a new paper that the ICSC loves. I was speaking up in Atlanta yesterday. It's called Retail Evolution. And so if you want to talk to me or send me an email, if I have heard that in the last week you used the term retail apocalypse, I will not return your email. We are not in a retail apocalypse. Retail is growing. Consumer spending is growing. Retail is evolving just as it has from when the first 2 cave people families came out of the cave and congregated on the beach and said, hey, I'll trade you some shrimp for your dead raccoon or whatever, and we'll have a mixed stew or something here today. It's evolving. It's not going away. The biggest trend, I would say, who does hospitality? A few of you. Look at those hands up there. Who does retail? Keep your hands up. All you retail people get to know, hotel. Retail is going in hotel. It's the new retail showroom. And here's how the model works. You think I'm joking? Call Marriott, call Hilton, call Restoration Hardware. Ask Warren Buffett why he just bought a huge stake in Restoration Hardware. These retailers are realizing they can go into hotel properties. The hotels will give them almost free rent space in return for them building it out, them operating it, and the hotel getting to just take 15% off the top. That's what's going on. And so what happens is the hotel gets a lower operating expense because no longer do they have to fixture and furnish the common areas and all the stuff out there because Restoration Hardware came in and just put all the lamps and the tables and the chairs and everything in there. And so they have no FF&E costs. That reduces the hospitality budget by 5 to 7%. The hotel gets a new revenue source, 15% off retail. Right? It's a win-win model. And that's happening as retailers are starting to commingle their loyalty programs with hotels like airlines did 3 decades ago. And so you're going to see if I buy a Delta ticket, I'm going to get so many points at Restoration Hardware or Disney Store or Build-A-Bear in a hotel and vice versa. And so all this is happening and commingling together. It's the single biggest trend that we're going to see on where retail ends up is the commingling with hospitality. This is a piece that was done covering this paper that I did. I'll skip past that. But this is what I want to show you. In this paper, we debunk some popular myths, and we give you predictions. One of the biggest myths is that most of the retail bankruptcies and store closings that we've experienced the last 7 to 10 years is because of who? Amazon or e-commerce? That's barbecue sauce. Again, this goes back, every problem we have, it goes back to the Fed, all right? It's the Fed. In the 1980s, they let Wall Street go into the retail industry and introduce this thing called leverage buyouts. And they let it go crazy because retail was a growth industry, right? All of us baby boomers that didn't have smartphones and we didn't have a long enough extension cord on the kitchen phone, we went to the mall and we bought stuff and we congregated and had conversations that we couldn't have at home. And that's all changing. And so what's happened is most of the retail bankruptcies and store closings we've had to date have because of over leverage. Look at a Toys R Us, look at a Barney's, go through all these retailers that are going under right now. It's all because of over leverage. And so that's been the real problem, and we're at only 10% of total retail sales online. What are we going to do when it's 20%? So we still have a lot of retail that's over leveraged, and my forecast is that by 2025, we will have 20% online sales. So if you think we've had a lot of store closings, get ready. We have 80,000 anchored shopping centers in the United States. 1 in 4 are here in the Southeast. We have a huge problem to deal with. And what we do with those empty stores and how we repurpose them is going to determine what happens to local government funding. 60% of local government funding comes from property taxes, and over half of that is from commercial real estate. And if half that commercial real estate is retail and it goes empty and it's not paying the same taxes, there's a huge local government funding problem. And so local government and the real estate community need to come together and work on adaptive reuse. It requires a different approach. It requires flexibility with things like parking requirements, setback ordinances, all kinds of things. And local government, here's my warning to you, if you don't work with the development community on repurposing these assets, your only option is going to be to go to your constituents and say, we're raising your residential property taxes 25 to 50% because we screwed up on commercial. So it's a huge, huge issue out there. So the other thing I do is the lower right-hand corner, if you're in retail, You need to be laser focused on the financial health and the leverage of the retailers in your shopping centers. So this is a latest chart. You can go to trep.com and get this each quarter updated. And at the top of the list is a little company known as Forever 21. And my daughters are crushed that Forever 21 is forever gone soon. And I'm actually pretty happy about it, because as a baby boom father, when my daughters come home from college, I only get to do laundry at about midnight after they've gone through and destroyed the laundry room, but they leave their laundry in the dryer. So I have to unload it, and when I go to unload it and I pull the dryer vent out, guess what I find? All the Forever 21 clothing. It only lasts about 2 washes. So I'm really excited about Forever 21 going away, because their clothing doesn't last very long. So I'm hoping my daughters will get more value out of their furniture, maybe some Levi jeans. But pay attention to what's happening here with your retailers. We think that retailers are done opening stores. They're not. Old Navy, which is part of Gap, is going to open 800 new stores. Think of that. Gap is in all kinds of problems, but Old Navy is working. They're going to open 800 stores. But here's a better example when I talk about retail evolution. How many of you have heard of Levi jeans? I grew up out in Colorado. That's all we wore. Then I came to the South and I found out there's these things called Wrangler jeans and all these others out there, right? So with the department store closings, guess what Levi's strategy was to sell jeans? Wholesale through department stores. Sears, Macy's, Kohl's, they delivered all their jeans. They had no stores. Now with all those department store closing, guess where Levi's has to sell its jeans? Nowhere. So where are they going? Levi's is opening their own retail stores, and they're opening them in hotels. Levi's stores in hotels, so you forgot to pack your really great looking designer jeans or whatever to go out that night. Wow, there's a Levi's store in the Intercontinental right down here, right next to the Starbucks, right? So this is a good example. The holiday season this year, UPS predicts it'll be a record one. The consumer retail sales came out this morning. The headline was, consumer retail sales only grow a modest 0.3% in October. Oh my God, they were negative 3% last month, and on a year-over-year basis, it's over 3% growth. The American consumer is on steroids, buying cars, clothes, houses. The consumer is healthy, employed, and getting raises and more wages. So don't doubt yourself on retail at all. Industrial. So this is my important one. So on the left there is a report that I did, a paper I published in the early part of the year. So if you talk to anybody from the Fed, or you talk to my kindergarten teachers, or the dean at the University of Alabama, they will tell you they can find my research just by looking at all the papers spread across the table, because there's always going to be a picture or a graphic. See, I was that kid that when he left kindergarten, I hated going from kindergarten to first grade because they got rid of all the picture books. I like pictures, and most of my real estate colleagues, we like pictures. We get bored reading stuff. So this was something I drew and came up with, and I'll show you the original graphic. It's a transformer made of all the elements of logistics: shipping, rail, trucking. And what you'll see there next to it, this is a new warehouse. This is what you're going to see here in Miami. So I forget who was on your panel, talked about a lot of old warehouses being torn down. Well, traditionally, it takes a land-to-building ratio of 3 or 4 to 1 to build a warehouse. Well, now with these modern e-commerce, try 7 to 1. So I'm on a board of directors with a REIT where we build and deliver. We're one of the landlords for FedEx, and every one we deliver has to have at least a 7 to 1 ratio for additional truck pad parking, double trailer trucks, e-commerce employees, you name it. Try to find 7 to 1 land to building ratio here in Miami. So what's happening is the developers are going vertical. We're going back to what Sears and Montgomery Wards did in the 1930s. And so Amazon goes on top, and they let all the other retailers go below so they can spy on them and figure out how to steal their merchandise. All right? So this is one that's going in Brooklyn right now. There's another one in Seattle. And what you're going to see is these types of new modern vertical warehouses with the truck ramps and all the truck parking underneath. And you might have 3 to 4, 500,000 square foot logistics e-commerce companies stacked up. You can do last mile. Can you imagine one of these here near downtown Miami or the airport? And the last mile fulfillment that you could do in Miami is absolutely incredible. The other thing I want you to realize is that all your old warehouses aren't throwaway. What we're finding is these old small warehouses are great for last mile fulfillment, and they're being bought up like mad. And you think I'm crazy? Look at the lower right quarter. This is a transaction just done by Nuveen. Blackstone accumulated a whole portfolio of these older warehouses in different cities in good infill locations. They bought them for about $35 a square foot. They didn't do much to them. They just sold them to Nuveen for over $100 a square foot because they're ideal for last mile fulfillment. These older warehouses are great to put cars from auto dealerships. All the auto dealerships are going away. The cars are going to be in warehouses, and the auto dealership is going to be a closed branch bank where the auto dealer meets you and does the financing papers and has the delivery in the drive-through for the branch banking. And so this is what we're going to see. What we're going to see on these prices. All right, so the next one, this is another one that was done over in Tampa. Another major price paid for a portfolio. This is getting over near the Lakeland area. Online retailers, as I mentioned, are transforming how we do warehouse construction. This is a blow-up of the example I just showed you in Brooklyn that's being done right now, and a similar one in Seattle, and you can kind of see the side profile there. But here's another one. This is great for you guys on your ports. It's also great in case you have hurricanes. Y'all have those down here? This is a metal frame warehouse. This is being built in Memphis right now that Amazon is using. What's missing in that warehouse that's in a traditional warehouse? There's no columns. You imagine a 500,000 or 1 million square foot warehouse to a major supplier with no columns, and they whatever they want to do in configuration with their conveyor systems. So this thing costs $36 a square foot to build, including the concrete pad and all that type of stuff, and they can put it up in 90 days to 6 months. So can you imagine for your port, you have different clients coming in and out, and you can put these up in 90 days to 6 months, and then if the supply chain changes, and let's say it moves from Miami to Port Everglades or Port Everglades up to Cape Canaveral or over to Tampa, you just dismantle this thing and you're only out about $15 a square foot for the concrete. This is a major thing that's going to be happening, and the innovation with no columns is the big thing in warehouse. This is my logistics transformer in the report I just showed you. I have one statistic up there at the top, 20%. I want to drive this home. 5 years ago, e-commerce companies and retailers, logistics retailers, occupied only 5% of all warehouse space. Last year, that grew to 20%. My forecast is it'll become 40 or 50% by 2025. It's happening very quickly. So on the left here is my original drawing for this transformer. It shows I have no artistic skills, but this is how I'm defending my copyright if it ever gets infringed. When I showed it to my daughters, my millennial daughters, they first said, "Dad, if this is supposed to be something happy, that's a really awful face." And I said, "That's not a face, that's the globe." So my other wiseacre millennial daughter said, "Dad, I know you've been out of college a long time, but you do know there's more than 3 continents, right?" And so she thought she had me, and I said, "Oh, wise one, have you not heard of global warming and sea level rise? There's only 3 continents left. The others are gone." So anyway, this is a really good report. It's about 50 pages. The link is there to the short version. Here's the key cliff notes to take away from that report. Everything I'm telling you about the economy, everything I'm telling you about logistics is boiled down to this. We're going from a shop and pick up economy to an order online and deliver it to me. Whether it's groceries, stuff we buy at a mall, cars, casual dining, all of that type of stuff, everything's going online. And how we do it, how we transport, how our infrastructure, the importance of ports and logistics and what you guys have done on rail are incredibly important. So I really applaud you for what you've done there. I mentioned, I think I had these in here last year, Central Florida being the inland empire of Florida. This is kind of an older area of what it looks like. Here's what Polk County, Lakeland, and now you had Plant City. It's incredible. This was strawberry farms 5 to 10 years ago. Wasn't anything there. And they brought in a company, Centerpoint, and they developed the big inland intermodal port stuff in Chicago, and they developed here, and you guys in Florida did something you do really well. You started it with Disney. You said, if you want to own your own stuff, have your own government, have your own roads, have your own rules, that's fine. So they built their own roadway network here. And so to move from the distribution centers to the rail and all the intermodal on I-4, they have their own road network, and you don't need to have a commercial driver's license truck driver. It can be autonomous, it can be anybody. It doesn't go out on I-4 and mess things up. It is an incredible place. They have community colleges. They've done everything right. Also, another unique statistic for Florida. Do you know where in the United States we manufacture more steel than anywhere else? It's not in the Midwest anymore. It's right there in Lakeland, Florida. Nucor came here because of the technology, the resources, the taxes, and the workforce, and built their most modern steel plant here. And all the stuff that goes in I-beams for office buildings and warehouses, or the rebar in construction and concrete, it's all made here in Florida. So absolutely incredible, the things that you've got going on there. I put a few statistics in here on the ports. I wanted you to realize in terms of bulk cargo and where things rank, and Miami doesn't usually rank very high here. You can see in terms of total tonnage that Louisiana and Houston rank high. They're dealing with petroleum and chemicals and seafood. If you look at on total containers, Port Everglades actually handles more than Miami. And the reason is Port Everglades and Miami are in the same U.S. Customs District, and the Customs District doesn't know who to give credit to. But here's the bottom line for Florida. You have 13 ports and harbors, commercial ports and harbors, and if you added up the container activity, you would almost rival LA and Long Beach in totality. So when they say Florida doesn't do ports and logistics and you don't even handle 1 million containers, I say barbecue sauce, add them all up and see how you do it and how you get them to Central Florida. And LA, Long Beach looks like a rounding error. So think about, kind of how to do that there. This is automobiles. Most people are surprised to learn that it's in Veracruz, Mexico, that handles more automobiles in North America than anywhere else. It's not Jacksonville, it's not Portland, it's not Seattle. Houston has got the biggest growth. Everything GM makes in terms of an SUV, a truck, a Suburban that goes to the Middle East or to Asia, it goes out there. Pay attention. You guys kind of lost in Jacksonville. You ceded all of your automobile handling in Jacksonville to Brunswick in Georgia and South Carolina. I don't know if you can get that back at this point, but there's plenty to say grace over. This is one that shows cranes. One of the most important things, we get fixated on ports about dredging and how deep we are. And it doesn't matter, because eventually Cuba's going to fall, and Cuba's going to be the big place we put all the stuff, and then we're going to shuttle it in here, and you won't need to be 55 or 60 feet deep. But what matters is your cranes. If you don't have modern gantry cranes that have the reach and the height to unload the boats, you're irrelevant. And so in Mobile, I have down there at the bottom, we have the deepest port in the Gulf Coast. We have more Class 1 railroads that connect to it, and we can't unload one damn boat. We have 2 1960 vintage cranes. We have a huge problem to try to turn that port around. And so you look at where you guys are and where you need to get to LA, Long Beach, Savannah, you need to have the dialogue shift from dredging to gantry cranes, because you need that capacity to unload these boats. So here's my last slide. I told you about the OTIF metric. This is a real metric. Walmart introduced it in 2017. It basically said, if we're going to succeed in online grocery and online and retail, we have got to be able to be efficient and deliver on the promise that we can deliver on time and what you ordered. So they introduced this OTIF metric, on time in full, and they said to all the suppliers, you have to meet a hurdle of 75%. And if 75% of the time all your orders aren't on time and in full, then we're going to assess you a penalty of 3% the value of the goods you handled. You're out of business. So you'd have thought all of the suppliers would have left Walmart and went to Target. They didn't. They said, no problem. We want to be efficient. So Walmart was actually able to increase this ratio last year to 78%, and they're about ready to increase it to 80%. We're seeing food companies, grocers, Kroger, Publix, all of them adopting this concept and this metric. And what we're going to see is they're going to shift it all the way down to the real estate. So if you have a warehouse that's in a congested area where trucks can't get in and out, you're going to get a low OTIF score, because you're going to mean that they can't deliver on time. And so we will see within 5 years, most warehouses and industrial parks and port locations having an OTIF score. And it'll affect your cap rate, the value of your property, your occupancy, your tenants, your retenancy, all of that type stuff. You think I'm joking? I'm working with one of the biggest entities in North America to basically develop and implement an OTIF score on every one of their warehouses within 24 months. And this will trickle down. So don't be surprised if you see an OTIF at 90%. So believe it or not, I made it to the end. So here's what I'll conclude in. Know what you don't know. Every time you think you know it all, no, you don't. There's a lot we don't know. It's all about your perspective. And I tell you, shift your perspective from whether we're in recession or closer to recession or still in recovery, and focus to those picture influences. What's going to determine? And the elections next year are going to be massive. I fear for the political conventions next summer. I fear that we could see the cities like Charlotte that are hosting the conventions looking like Detroit in 1969. I'm not exaggerating. I really think we're ripping this country apart. And that is our biggest economic risk in our existence as a country. All of us have got to dial back and figure out how to be able to have civil dialogues with people on important issues. And we can start that local on issues like rent control and adaptive reuse and all of that. The bull, the original Merrill Lynch bull, agrees with me. He's here in Florida. Everything has left New York and New Jersey for Florida. It's all here. Salt, liquidity, banking, jobs, you name it. It's all right here. I'm incredibly bullish on the national economy. I agree with Karen, no recession in sight. I think we could surprise better than 2% GDP. I think the jobs numbers, we're going to continue. Our biggest challenge is we just don't have enough labor to grow 200,000 jobs a month. When we produce over 125,000 jobs last month, when GM was on strike, 46,000 GM workers idled, 76,000 suppliers workers, and we still produce 125,000 jobs, that's incredible. It's all about OTIF. Everything we're doing, shop and pick up, to online and deliver to me. Think about that in housing, for rent housing, retail, auto dealerships, food supply, everything else. So the last thing I'll conclude on is a good quote from Yogi Berra. He's my favorite economist of all time. I think he should be enshrined at the Fed as the best economist that we ever had in this country. And one of his famous quotes was, "You've got to be very careful if you don't know where you are going, because you might not get there." So develop your plan, focus on the picture influences, and it's all about OTIF. I hope this was helpful. Thanks.
I want to thank everyone for being here. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, Dwayne Morris and Jay Steinman. And that's a wrap, folks. We'll see you next year, same place, same time. Have a good Friday.